Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and I'm joined today by the wondrous Miss Sara. Sara, how are you?
Hopefully, I'm still wondrous.
And the aspirantly wondrous Mr. Hermann Pretorius. Hermann, how are you?
Well, aspirantly wondrous. No, I must say, it's always very easy to tell who you're going for first when I'm on the show, because it's like I'm joined by there and then a positive adjective, and then I'm just like, it's not me.
Well, if you want my take, when I go on without you, I always get lost.
So you're basically the me of the rest of the institute.
That's right.
I mean, I'm so sorry to hear
Look,
that.
I just make it up as I go along, so I have no idea if a pattern has emerged.
Yeah, you're like the IEC.
Yeah.
Yes,
You're like the
I just make it up
IEC.
as I go along. You know, this whole Constitution thing, it's what's that line from Pirates of the Caribbean? It's more like a guideline.
Yes.
But yeah, please check out our video from yesterday because it is a lot more serious than this one is likely to be.
Yes.
And that is about
as
your
the
vote being
kids
stolen.
And it's as the kids say, it's what's the word, slapping. It's like, it's just I is that the word? I don't know.
Hermann,
I mean,
you're revealing far too much about how uncool we are.
No, I that was public knowledge. I mean, my pop culture references end in the 20s, you know, like the 1920s. If it's post La Boheme's premiere, I don't know.
You see, we know that's a good reference because I don't get it, and that's how you know that it's.
Hermann, you and I are alone.
Yes.
In many ways.
Yes. So let us move on to great and serious matters. And firstly, I'd like to say that the Daily Friend apparently has an enormous amount of power. Yesterday, we talked about the deputy president being mysteriously absent from the country for a month because he is apparently receiving some sort of medical treatment. And no doubt he saw the episode because he is back in South Africa this morning. So anyway, it seems like the story ends there, although I think I am still a little bit curious as to why he was there for so long, but it seems like he's all right, so that's all good. But let's get into our first real story of today, and that is, of course, load shedding. So the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, the CSIR, has come out with a report which says that 2020 was, in fact, the worst year for load shedding so far. Last year, there were 859 hours of load shedding, with 1,798 gigawatt hours of energy shed. And the previous highest was back in 2015, where 852 hours was shed. And this year, in the first half, we managed 650 hours. So we've still got a ways to go to catch up to where we were last year. But if we have anything like the previous year in terms of load shedding, we are going to have an awful lot still in store for us this year. And the real question, as we were talking about before the show, is how on earth did we have load shedding last year when there wasn't an economy to speak of? Now, I suspect I'm being a little bit facetious because I think that, you know, it was probably something to do with the pandemic. I think they couldn't get overseas engineers or something to fix a certain problem. But that also doesn't say good things about Eskom either. So let me start with you, Hermann. What are your thoughts on where Eskom's at? I was saying something good about CEO Andre de Ruyter before the show. What's your take on the situation?
Yeah, no. So let's get the praise out of the way. It is to de Ruyter's credit that in the almost 2 years, 18 months or so, almost 2 years that he's been at the helm of Eskom, he's managed to reduce Eskom's debt by 90 billion rand. Now that's I mean, credit where credit is due. That's not bad. He manages for the first time in many, many years to get Eskom's debt below the 400 billion rand mark. And as I always say, I mean, it really takes a level of skill and commitment to run a monopoly at a loss. It is impressive that Eskom has been managed so badly that it makes a loss of 400 billion rand. And I think, as with many, of the fiscal considerations in our country, the chickens are coming home to roost now, in the sense that Eskom, the pressure on Eskom from the government was such that they must not, insist on certain areas being, precise in their payments, because that would be politically damaging to the ANC. So the first thing is the chickens are coming home to roost. And a few months ago, actually, there was a bit of a positive story coming out of this whole thing, with independent power providers or power producers, almost given the green light. I mean, it would have been a green light.
Gwede Mantashe was overridden, wasn't he, by the president?
Yes, and I mean that it's interesting that the president found enough of a spine to do that. But the announcement of that opportunity, I mean, it's actually stalled since then. The problems was that in March 2021, this announcement was made, and there was this non-negotiable timeline that was supposed to conclude by the end of July, with then power IPPs starting to add power to the grid in the second half of 2022. But because of the government dragging its feet in setting out these timelines, making sure that there was regulatory clarity, all of this, even the silver lining on the dark cloud, is now being extinguished. So if we're looking at the issue of load shedding, we have to realize that, frankly, I think we need to stop calling it load shedding. It should be rolling blackouts or power cuts. Load shedding is just, I mean, it's just too nice a term, and so that's the first thing. The second thing we must realize is that the Director can do what he can. He can reduce Eskom's massive debt burden, but that does not.
There was a story this morning. They were spending 29 million rand or something on milk.
Yes, no, I mean, so they can spend money on milk until the cows come home. Agriculture joke. But the problem is that we should. The reality of load shedding is government made, and the fact that we are not yet at a solution is government made. The real question now is, will there be any movement into the direction of solving this problem, the IPPs being the first step? And I think it shouldn't come as a disappointment or a surprise, but it is surprisingly disappointing that even this small step of the IPP thing hasn't materialized, hasn't come to fruition, and just shows why investment isn't coming to this country. In fact, quite the opposite.
So, Sara, I have a question for you. What is the fastest moving, most elusive thing in the world?
Oh, the field is wide. I'll have to leave it to you.
A South African deadline or a South African government deadline?
Well, I don't know. It tends to go up in a puff of smoke. I have a very cynical take on that, as is my wont. You see, the pressure was so high when Cyril sort of pushed Gwede aside to make this announcement. But of course, when he's made the announcement, who's got to come back to manage it? Gwede Mantashe. So the fact that nothing's happened is a surprise to absolutely nobody whatsoever, because I'm not quite sure what Gwede wants to do, but he certainly doesn't want to do a lot.
Well, I will say that there are rumors at the moment that Gwede may be reshuffled out into another department.
And I mean, that would be sad, because after Batabile Dlamini left cabinet, Mantashe became the only South African cabinet minister you could see from space.
Yes, you'll probably still be able to see him from space, because for that very reason. But the thing that, I mean, just to divert slightly on the reshuffling, that speaks for itself. I mean, this is deck chairs on Titanic stuff. So it doesn't matter who he's replaced by, unless it's somebody very keen to do the right thing, which is just not in our experience. But with the Eskom thing, I mean, last year, it doesn't matter what electricity the Eskom had to supply for. There was much less economic activity, and the greatest consumers of electricity are big business, big manufacturing. So I mean, console glass nearly went to the wall. Breweries struggled. It just got there was no exporting. There was not very much importing. So all of those big industries were as badly affected as most of us. So the reason for the load shedding, which I now can't remember, but it is absolutely. I mean, let's put it this way: you've got the poorest economic year in decades. The load shedding goes up. You've got it's. Sorry, I just lost my train of. But it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, it doesn't matter what the reasons are. It makes no sense unless, of course, they are bizarre reasons. But as you say, we have time still to catch up, particularly because load shedding tends to be greatest in summer, believe it or not. And we think, and largely, if we have good rains, it'll be lots of wet coal, and it always is every year. I just want to disagree a bit about calling it load shedding as opposed to rolling blackouts. The thing about language is that a word takes on a certain meaning. And when you say load shedding, you actually mean total catastrophic interruption of power supply. Nobody thinks it means anything else. Yeah. So, it is its own word. In effect, it's become its own word.
I do also want to defend the term load shedding a little bit in that it is accurate. They are on purpose switching off parts of the grid because if they didn't, the grid would collapse and all of the power stations would have to be shut down, and we'd have a total blackout of the entire country for possibly weeks, maybe months, as they had to restart all of them from a cold start, which is
a terrible thing. I mean, let's put it this way: rolling blackout sounds closer to catastrophe than load shedding. But I think we all agree that load shedding now means catastrophe.
Yes, no. Well, South Africans have a very special love for the term load shedding, I think, at this point.
Or we should just call it BEE, like, bullshit electronic interruption. No, that's not how you spell interruption. Bullshit electric. No, I can't think of another word.
No, let's move on before you send us down even foggier waters. So while of course Eskom is struggling to keep its head above water and racing to achieve ever higher levels of load shedding, the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, NUMSA, I think that's what they stand for, has threatened that there will be a massive strike, what they're calling the mother of all strikes, not just in the steel industry, steel engineering, which is where the pay dispute is, but they're also going to call their allegedly 360,000 members in car manufacturing, component supplies, tire sector, manufacturing, mining, aviation, and ports to join in solidarity. NUMSA initially demanded a 1-year 15% pay increase across the board for all of its members and all of the people employed in the steel industry, but they decided to moderate considering the economic situation and said, well, actually we only want 8%. Which, what's inflation currently? I can't remember. 5%, something like that. 4%.
4%.
Anyway, yeah. So yeah, they've now threatened this great strike. We don't know where it's going to go. I think the company is offering sort of 4.4%. So it could still be averted at this stage. But Sara, your thoughts?
It's created a sense of nostalgia because I was in the labor law game years ago, and I mean NUMSA was one of the biggies in the COSATU fold. I think the problem is, and it goes to a query by or comment by someone watching, and that is, these are probably amongst the only employed people left in South Africa, to sort of misquote Hermann. And so how on earth do they expect any support for a strike when unemployment has become so catastrophic on the one hand, and the economy is just going nowhere but pretty much backwards on the other? And so it just strikes me as, sorry, pardon the pun, it's just somewhat odd that I don't know, maybe they felt emboldened by the public sector strike, except there's public sector negotiations. Except the problem is this isn't the public sector. This is the private sector, and the engineering, steel and engineering union, association, is doing the bargaining on behalf of the employers. And I'm not sure if anyone can afford a 4 to 5% increase, never mind anything else. Now, starting at the 15% may feel a bit idiotic from our point of view, but back in the day, so 20 years ago, you'd start at amounts like 35% or 30%, and then it would gradually plummet down to 10%. And it's working on that that same bargaining principle that it worked on then, when by now one should be in very, very different modes of bargaining, much less aggressive and I was going to say spoiled, but okay, let's just say aggressive. It's because things are so bad, both for the individuals and for the employers. So I don't think, I'm not sure if they'll be able to bring out the mining sector, and it's the one sector that's doing really well. And I'm sure the tub thumping is as a result of the fact that it's the one sector that is actually bringing in the money. So if they threaten to shut it down, they'll get the increase they want. It won't happen.
So it's also worth noting that they also want to get an increase of consumer price inflation plus 2% for the next 2 years. And if that number falls below 6%, employers must offer 6% or reopen negotiations. So it's not like they just want this as a one-off thing.
Or liquidate.
Yeah.
Close up, retrench.
It seems as though their intention is to become South Africa's smallest union. I think they're currently one of its biggest unions. Is that correct?
They are. SATU and Nahawu are bigger. But they weren't.
But they're up there. They're up there in the big range. But at this rate, they really are going to push themselves to be South Africa's smallest union because there won't be more jobs in the industry to represent. Hermann, your thoughts?
Well, when I first heard the phrase of mother of all strikes, I thought, what's Jesse Duarte doing now?
I think the person who really made that phrase popular was Saddam Hussein when he said during the first Gulf War that it would be the mother of all battles against the Americans. And, he lost that one rather badly.
Yeah, no. But so I must say, I think there are a few things here to consider. Is someone in the comment section mentioned rightly that the unions earn a percentage of their money through the money of the workers, and if one of the 3 or 4 things that I would genuinely change about this country if I were president for 35 minutes or something, is the weak protection for workers who are members of unions or are, in a workplace environment where there are some union regulations, but they do not want to go on strike. I think the secret balloting of strike movements is really, it's such a simple little mechanism, and you can only be opposed to it for bad reasons. There's no honest to God way of saying I'm against giving workers a vote on whether they should stop earning for a period and whether the company they work for should incur damage. And what Margaret Thatcher did quite spectacularly is she prepared for the big coal strike that ultimately undermined Scargill and his ilk, because at the first confrontation in the early 80s, Thatcher gave in, and a lot of her party members and ideological allies were very disappointed by her giving in. But she had a plan because she then started stockpiling coal. So by the time that the unions, there's the coal unions under Scargill's lunacy, went on full strike, the government was ready and they could outlast the strike with the coal reserves. But the thing that Scargill really miscalculated was that he never put the strike motion, or he never put the strike motion to a vote. And in South Africa, I think if we could rely on the common sense of ordinary people, the moderate middle, voting on whether they should go on strike or not, it would significantly improve labor relations in this country and productivity. But the fact that you are dealing with immense vested interests means that we will keep on seeing absurd wage demands, and we will keep on seeing workers denied any fundamental say in their own working circumstances and the pay and, the negotiations that go with that. So, I mean, it really is just a tragedy. As Sara points out, it's not like the economy is firing on all cylinders and now's the time to strike. It really is. You're going to undermine the few bits of the economy that still have life in them. And the workers haven't really been consulted on this, and it's not demanded. It's not necessary. And I think that's, a really tragic state of affairs.
Can I just add to that, because I can talk from back then. You see, what you used to have is you used to have balloting for strikes, which management could observe. They didn't run it, they didn't control it in any way. They just observed to make sure that there was nothing untoward about the process. And most of the time, guys did support the strike, but there were times when they didn't, and a strike couldn't happen. And when did that change? 1995.
Tito Mboweni.
And then there's the second thing, of course, and you alluded to it, is the fact that striking and locking out are very tactical weapons, and they're very substantial weapons. People are harmed, and part of that is the intention to get higher wages, etc. You've got to be tactical. You do not strike, and this has happened quite often in a time when the company could use the downtime. They've got their stocks full, much like Thatcher, and they could use the downtime to cut back on a whole lot of costs. And then unions go on strike, and you can cut back on their salaries as well because you don't pay them while they're on strike. And so the economy is a bit like that. Now is not the time. The strength, ironically, is in the weakness of the employer.
Well said. All right, let us move on to our next topic. And that is the trouble surrounding the Health Professions Council of South Africa, which Sara tells me, and this is something I really should have known, is the body that determines who is a healthcare professional and who is not. So their registrar, their recently appointed registrar, Dr. David Matau, who formerly worked for the Free State Health Department, has appeared in court this week in connection with allegedly corrupt payments amounting to 8.7 million rand when he was head of the Free State Health Department. That's not a good sign, and I think if anyone knew anything about the Free State Health Department, it would make one suspicious of appointing any senior figures from that, because I believe that it was placed under administration by the provincial government and was notorious for being one of the worst performing in the country. Sara, you have some experience with the Healthcare Professionals Council.
Yeah,
Can you tell us
it's a body that does register healthcare professionals, and you have to go through it to be a bona fide healthcare practitioner in this country. But otherwise, most doctors will tell you they do nothing for them except support them in no way whatsoever when they need the help. So it's purely a registration body. I'm not quite sure actually how large it is, but I'm sure it's larger than it needs to be. A few years ago, it wasn't arbitrary. I did a disciplinary hearing for a manager, and It was a difficult week. I mean, the manager's lawyers did a good job at sort of, trying to kick things into touch, including an application to the Labour Court for something or other. And this is a manager who had been on paid suspension for 3 years on a charge of 11 cases of sexual harassment. And they managed to get into the evidence the fact that this thing had been delayed for so long. And of course, just the competence of the entity for having allowed this to go on for so long. So I fired him. But it was all, it almost felt like somebody's got to do it, because otherwise he must have earned a few million over the time he was on suspension. And that's the problem with the public sector. It doesn't fire. Processes have to be followed, but they've got to be followed as expeditiously as possible. They've got to be done. People have to be dismissed. You often find one of the greatest advantages of having dismissed someone is the environment itself improves, because people are as badly affected by the very existence of the person in the department or over the department as whoever may be affected for some other reason. And it makes all the difference when that person is justifiably out of the system. And that's really what this brought to mind.
Anything to add?
Yeah, no. Well, I've got my own specific, set of bugbears with the Healthcare Professionals Council, because in May this year, this council. Now, let's be clear about what they are. They don't have a mandate from their members to speak. They only serve as a regulatory registering authority to make sure that someone can practice according to law medicine in the Republic. And yet in May this year, they found the gumption to tell Parliament that the Medical Schemes Act should be scrapped and that all medical scheme assets should go to the NHI. They further told Parliament that the NHI should be funded with taxes from all employed South Africans. So, I mean, not only do you have the bizarre idea that you can conjure up more tax money in a country like South Africa, not only do you have the nonsense of supporting a policy that is, I mean, opponents of the NHI have the easiest job in the world since March 2020, because you literally just have to point at the state and at the health minister and at the corruption and the failures to essentially say you want this, but on a massive scale for the rest of the country. Not only do we have these two niggles, we also have this body that for some reason thinks it has the mandate or the right to speak on an issue of policy when it really is nothing more than a glorified spreadsheet. I think it is quite astounding that we've allowed these sorts of public entities to somehow feel that they have a role to play here. And it was the same with the Pharmaceutical Council that's endorsed the NHI on behalf of its members without informing its members. These sorts of entities are lily-livered pawns at best, and they are ideological allies of the government with some fingers in several pies at worst. I mean, it really is shocking that these people have the gumption to have any sort of say about anything that goes on in our lives when they can't get their own things together in order. Sorry, I ran through several words that were not appropriate.
Nice save there, Hermann.
Can I just give you some idea of what they're dealing with? Is Dr. Matau joined them at the end of June. At the beginning of August, on the 2nd of August, he and 10 others appeared in I'd like to read it for you, the Bloemfontein Magistrates Court on 304 counts ranging from contravention of Public Finance Management Act, forgery and uttering, to fraud, corruption and money laundering. Matau himself is charged on 45 counts. I mean, we're in 2021. I mean, even if this happened a year or two ago, the Zondo Commission has existed for longer. The public is as angry as hell. I was also looking for a few words. It's surely, I mean, if he's been charged with that, the very fact of possibly being charged was known fairly widely by the end of June. So why didn't the council know about it? Oh, God, I don't know.
Yeah. But that's the public sector for you. Anyway, I think that's all the time we have for today. I did want to mention, we did want to talk a little bit, but we don't have time, about former South African champion swimmer Roland Schoeman. I don't know, as one of former champion. Anyway, point is, he's written to President Cyril Ramaphosa saying that he should in fact be made Minister of Sport. And considering the very bad state of our sports bodies right now, why not give him a shot? And with that ringing endorsement, I'll call it to a close. Thank you very much for listening. We hope that you enjoyed it or found it interesting. And of course, we will be back with you next week. Please support the Institute of Race Relations, which funds the Daily Friend show and the dailyfriend.co.za by SMSing your name to 32823. It's on the banner behind me. And have a wonderful weekend, everyone. Cheers.